If you can dance this waltz, I'll adopt you. Billionaire mocks black pregnant maid, but then fell in love. The crowd around them began to murmur, not in ridicule anymore, but in genuine amazement. Someone started clapping in time with the music, then another person. Soon the entire section was keeping rhythm. Their earlier bloodthirst transformed into appreciation. Have you ever been humiliated in front of people who should have protected you? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She was 8 months pregnant, scrubbing champagne stains from marble floors, when the richest man in Palm Beach decided to destroy her dignity in front of 300 guests. The Cole Resort Ballroom glittered like a jewel box that October night in 2003. Crystal chandeliers threw rainbow patterns across polished marble, while Florida's wealthiest elite sipped Dom Perignon and wrote checks they'd never miss. Alana Williams moved between the flowing gowns and designer suits, her pregnant belly making every step a careful calculation. The black uniform stretched tight across her swollen frame, but she kept her head high. She had to. This job paid for the tiny apartment in Atlanta where she'd return tomorrow, and the baby growing inside her needed everything she could provide. Careful there, sweetheart. The voice dripped with false concern. Wouldn't want you to slip and hurt the merchandise. Richard Cole stood above her, all 6 feet of expensive arrogance wrapped in a tuxedo that cost more than most people's cars. His steel gray eyes swept over her kneeling form with the cold assessment of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Behind him, his circle of friends chuckled at his wit. His fiancée, Victoria Ashworth, pressed closer to his side, her diamond necklace catching the light like sharp teeth. "Tell me something," Richard continued, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "What makes a girl like you think she deserves more than this life?" The conversations around them died. Guests turned to watch the show, champagne glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Alana's cheeks burned, but she finished wiping the spill with steady hands. When she stood, her movements held a grace that her uniform couldn't hide. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Cole." "Your job." He smiled. It was sharp enough to cut glass. "But I bet you dream of more, don't you? Dancing with the rich folks instead of cleaning up after them." The orchestra on the far side of the ballroom began a waltz. The melody floated through the charged air between them like a challenge. Richard's eyes gleamed with cruel inspiration. "Here's what we'll do. Dance this waltz with me. Right here, right now, in front of everyone." His voice rose, ensuring the entire section could hear. "If you can keep up for 3 minutes without embarrassing yourself, maybe you really are worthy of dreaming bigger than mop buckets and minimum wage." Have you ever been humiliated in front of people who should have protected you? Ever had someone dare you to prove your worth in your most vulnerable moment? The silence stretched between them like a hell breath. Alana felt every eye in the room burning into her skin. The baby shifted inside her, a gentle reminder of why she endured moments like these. Her hands trembled as she untied her apron, but her voice stayed steady. 3 minutes. 3 minutes, Richard confirmed, his smile widening. "Unless you'd rather admit you know your place." The crowd leaned forward, hungry for drama. Someone whispered, "This is going to be a disaster." Another voice murmured, "Poor thing doesn't know what she's gotten into." But as Alana stepped forward, something shifted in the air. Her worn shoes clicked against the marble with surprising confidence. She'd grown up in Atlanta's dance studios, back when her grandmother could still afford lessons. Before life got complicated, before choices became sacrifices. "Would you have taken the dare?" she asked, looking directly into the camera that would never exist, but somehow captured this moment anyway. "Tell me in the comments what you would have done." Richard offered his hand with the theatrical flourish of a man, certain he was about to witness a spectacle. His fingers closed around hers, and for one heartbeat, something unexpected flickered across his face. Her skin was soft despite the calluses from work, and warm in a way that had nothing to do with the ballroom's heat. As the waltz began, something shifted in Richard's chest. Not pity, not amusement, something far more dangerous than either. Desire. When she lifted her chin and stepped onto that marble floor, Every billionaire in the room realized they were witnessing something they'd never seen before. True nobility. The first notes of the waltz hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Alana placed her free hand on Richard's shoulder, and the ballroom held its breath. Her pregnant belly created a careful distance between them, but somehow that only made the moment more intimate. More impossible. Then she began to move. Richard had expected stumbling. Maybe tears. Definitely embarrassment that would send her scurrying back to her cleaning cart within 30 seconds. Instead, he found himself following her lead as she glided across the floor with liquid grace. Her feet barely seemed to touch the marble. The heavy uniform that had marked her as the help now flowed around her like evening wear. Jesus, someone whispered from the crowd. The other dancers had cleared the floor without being asked. Even the orchestra seemed to play softer, as if recognizing they were providing soundtrack to something sacred. The chandeliers above cast moving shadows that danced with them, turning the ballroom into a cathedral of light and motion. Richard's world narrowed to the woman in his arms. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, not in challenge now, but with a quiet confidence that made his chest tight. She smelled like lavender soap and something else. Something that reminded him of his grandmother's garden in South Carolina, back before money had sanitized every corner of his life. Where did you learn to dance like this? The question slipped out before he could stop it. My grandmother taught me. Alana's voice was steady, but her eyes held depths he hadn't noticed before. She said a woman who could dance could survive anything. Grace under pressure. They spun through a complex turn that should have been impossible in her condition. Instead, she made it look effortless. Richard found himself actually dancing now, not just going through motions to humiliate her. His body responded to hers in ways that had nothing to do with mockery and everything to do with something he'd never felt before. Recognition, like his soul was finally meeting its match. The crowd around them began to murmur, not in ridicule anymore, but in genuine amazement. Someone started clapping in time with the music, then another person. Soon the entire section was keeping rhythm. Their earlier bloodthirst transformed into appreciation. Look at her. A woman's voice carried over the music. She's beautiful. Richard's hand tightened on Alana's waist. She was beautiful, not just in this moment, but always. How had he missed it before? How had he looked at her and seen only what he expected to see? His fiancée's voice cut through his thoughts like broken glass. This is a joke, right? Richard, stop this nonsense. But Richard couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. The music swelled around them, and Alana's hand in his felt like an anchor to something real. Something that mattered more than the approval of people who wrote charity checks to feel better about their empty lives. You're not what I expected, he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. Neither are you, she replied, and for a moment, her guard dropped. He saw exhaustion there, fear about the future, but also strength that ran deeper than any foundation he'd ever built. The waltz reached its crescendo. Richard lifted her hand high, spinning her in a final turn that brought gasps from the audience. When she came back to face him, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes bright with something that might have been joy. The music ended. Applause thundered through the ballroom, genuine and warm. People were on their feet, some wiping their eyes. Even the orchestra members were smiling. Richard couldn't let go of her hand. I was wrong about you. The words hung between them, simple but loaded with implications that terrified him. Alana's eyes searched his face, looking for the trick. The punchline that would turn this moment back into cruelty. Have you ever witnessed someone transform humiliation into triumph? Share your story below, because what happened next changed both their lives forever. But by morning, she was gone. He owned half of Florida's coastline, but couldn't find one pregnant woman who'd vanished into the Atlanta streets. Richard stood at his penthouse window overlooking the Atlantic, his morning coffee growing cold in his hand. 3 days had passed since the charity ball. 3 days since Alana Williams had disappeared from his resort like she'd never existed at all. His head of security had checked everywhere. The staff quarters were empty. Her cleaning cart sat abandoned in a supply closet. No forwarding address. No final paycheck claimed. Gone. Sir, His assistant knocked on the office door. The quarterly reports are ready for review. Richard didn't turn around. The numbers that usually demanded his complete attention felt meaningless now. All he could think about was the way Alana had felt his arms. The quiet dignity in her voice when she'd accepted his cruel challenge. The grace that had turned his mockery into something beautiful. Cancel my meetings today. Sir, all of them. Clear my schedule. His assistant's reflection in the window showed confusion, but she knew better than to question him twice. The door closed with a soft click, leaving him alone with thoughts that refused to behave. Victoria had tried calling 6 times since breakfast. He'd ignored every call. Their engagement announcement was scheduled for next month's society pages, but the idea of marrying her now felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Everything had changed in 3 minutes of dancing, and he couldn't explain why. The private investigator's office in downtown West Palm Beach smelled like coffee and desperation. Richard had never hired someone to find a person before. Usually people came to him. I need to locate someone, he told the grizzled man behind the desk. A woman. She worked at my resort, but left without notice. Employee dispute? The investigator's eyes held the knowing look of someone who'd heard every story twice. Something like that. Name? Alana Williams. From Atlanta. 8 months pregnant. Richard paused, realizing how little he actually knew about her. She's African American. Early 20s. Beautiful. The investigator made notes without looking up. Last known address. That's what I need you to find. When was the last time someone disappeared from your life and you couldn't stop thinking about them? The question followed Richard back to his office, where work felt impossible and Victoria's engagement ring sat in its velvet box like an accusation. By evening, he was pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. The waltz played in his head on repeat. He could still feel the warmth of Alana's hand in his, the way she'd looked at him in that final moment. Not with fear or hatred, but with something that might have been hope. His phone rang. The investigator. Found her. Richard's heart stopped. Where? Atlanta. Working 2 jobs, living in a rough neighborhood. Looks like she's due any day now. The address burned itself into Richard's memory. An apartment complex in East Atlanta, the kind of place where dreams went to die. The kind of place he'd never set foot in under normal circumstances. But nothing about this was normal. The investigator's report landed on his desk with a single photo. Alana at a bus stop, visibly more pregnant than she'd been 3 days ago, completely alone. The image hit him like a physical blow. He was in his car before he could talk himself out of it. He told himself he was checking on her welfare, but billionaires don't drive to Atlanta at midnight for charity cases. The Mercedes looked like a spaceship on the cracked asphalt of East Atlanta. Richard sat in the driver's seat, staring up at the tired apartment building that housed Alana Williams. Paint peeled from the exterior walls like sunburned skin. A few windows were boarded up. The parking lot was more potholes than pavement. This was her world, the one he'd mocked 3 days ago. Rain began to spatter the windshield as he climbed the external stairs to the 2nd floor. The metal railing was loose under his grip, and somewhere a baby was crying through thin walls. The smell of fried food and desperation hung in the humid air. Apartment 2C. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound like more mockery? The door opened before he could decide. Alana stood there in an oversized t-shirt and worn jeans, her pregnant belly straining the fabric. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and without makeup, she looked even younger than he'd remembered. But her eyes held the same quiet strength that had stopped his world 3 nights ago. Mr. Cole. No surprise in her voice, as if billionaires showed up at her door every day. Alana. Her name felt different in his mouth here. Less formal, more real. They stared at each other through the screen door, rain drumming louder on the metal roof above them. She didn't invite him in, didn't ask what he wanted, just waited with the patience of someone who'd learned not to expect explanations for people like him. I wanted to... He stopped, realizing he had no idea what he wanted. To see if you were all right. I'm Fina. But she wasn't fine. He could see it in the tired lines around her eyes, the way she held herself like every movement cost her. The apartment behind her was clean but sparse. A single lamp provided weak light, and he could make out a small kitchen where dishes dried in a rack by hand. "Can I come in?" She studied his face for a long moment. "Why?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you." The honesty surprised them both. Alana's hand tightened on the doorframe, and something flickered in her expression. Not the hope he'd glimpsed at the ball, but something more cautious, more aware of consequences. "What do you want from me?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about you. Have you ever been drawn to someone you knew you shouldn't want?" The question hung between them like the humid Georgia air. Richard felt sweat gathering under his expensive shirt, but not from the heat. "I'm not some fantasy, Mr. Cole. I'm a woman trying to survive long enough to bring her baby into the world safely. I don't have time for whatever midlife crisis brought you to my door." Her words should have stung. Instead, they made him want her more. Here was someone who saw through his money and status to the man underneath. Someone who wasn't impressed by his power. "Let me help you." "I don't need your help. Everyone needs help sometimes." "Not from you." But her voice lacked conviction. Through the screen door, he could see bills stacked on a small table. Past due notices mixed with medical appointments. The reality of her situation hit him like cold water. Thunder crashed overhead, and the rain became a downpour. Alana looked past him at the storm, then back at his soaked designer clothes. "You're going to catch pneumonia standing out there." She stepped back, opening the screen door. Not an invitation exactly, but not rejection either. Richard crossed her threshold and entered a world where choices mattered because there were so few of them. When she collapsed from exhaustion in his arms 20 minutes later, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She woke up in a private hospital room with silk sheets and a view of Peachtree Street, and a billionaire keeping vigil by her bedside. The first thing Alana noticed was the quiet. No sit-ins, no shouting through paper-thin walls, no crying babies in neighboring apartments. Just the soft hum of expensive medical equipment and the distant sounds of Atlanta traffic far below. The second thing she noticed was Richard Cole asleep in a chair beside her bed, his designer shirt wrinkled and his usually perfect hair falling across his forehead. He looked younger like this, less intimidating, almost human. "You're awake." His eyes opened as if he'd felt her watching him. "How do you feel?" "Like I'm dreaming." The room around her was pristine white and chrome, with flowers on the windowsill and a view of the city she'd never seen from this height. "What happened?" "You fainted. Dehydration and exhaustion," the doctor said. "When did you last eat a real meal?" The question made her defensive. "I eat. Crackers and peanut butter don't count as nutrition when you're 8 months pregnant." Heat flooded her cheeks. He'd been in her apartment long enough to inventory her kitchen, to see exactly how close to the edge she was living. "I can't afford." "I know." His voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. "That's not judgment. It's concern." She tried to sit up, but dizziness made the room tilt. Richard was beside her in an instant, his hands steady on her shoulders. The touch sent electricity through the hospital gown, and she became acutely aware that she was wearing nothing underneath the thin fabric. "Easy. The doctor wants you on bed rest for at least 48 hours. "I can't stay here for 48 hours. Do you know what this place costs per night?" "I do. And it's handled." "No." She pushed against his hands, trying to get up. "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity." "Then what is it?" Richard's hands were still on her shoulders, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with something else. Something warm and male that made her stomach flutter in ways that had nothing to do with pregnancy. "I don't know what to call it," he said finally, "but I need to know you're safe. When someone shows up for you in your darkest moment, how do you know if their intentions are pure?" The question echoed in the space between them as rain began to streak the windows. "Why?" The word came out smaller than she intended. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Richard's thumb traced along her collarbone where the hospital gown had slipped. The touch was feather-light, but made her breath catch. "Because 3 days ago, you showed me something I'd forgotten existed." "What?" "Grace. Real grace. Not the kind that comes with breeding and bank accounts, but the kind that comes from here. His hand moved to rest over her heart, and the gesture was so tender it made her eyes burn. Mr. Cole. Richard. My name is Richard. Richard. His name felt strange on her tongue. Too intimate for what they were. Too familiar for what they weren't. I can't be your charity case. Then be something else. The words hung between them, loaded with possibilities that scared her more than poverty ever had. Because poverty she understood. She knew how to fight it, how to survive it. But this felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. The baby needs complete rest, she said finally. That's what the doctor told you, isn't it? Yes. And if I go back to my apartment, back to working 2 jobs, what happens then? Richard's jaw tightened. The doctor said stress could cause early labor. Complications. The word complications settled between them like a threat. They both knew what that meant for a woman with no insurance and no support system. So I'll stay, she said, for the baby. But this doesn't change anything between us. Even as she said it, she knew it was already too late. Everything had changed the moment he'd shown up at her door in the rain. His response would make her heart race in ways that had nothing to do with medical emergencies. He didn't offer her money. He offered her a choice no one had ever given her before. Power. I have a proposition. Richard's voice cut through the morning quiet of her hospital room. 3 days of bed rest had brought color back to Alana's cheeks, but her eyes still held the wariness of someone who'd learned that gifts always came with strings attached. I'm listening. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back like he was addressing a boardroom instead of a pregnant woman in a hospital bed. Cole Enterprises is expanding into community development. Urban renewal projects in cities like Atlanta, Jacksonville, Miami. I need someone who understands these communities from the inside. And you think that's me? I know it is. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You've lived in these neighborhoods. You know what works and what doesn't. What people actually need versus what politicians think they need. Alana shifted in the bed, her hand resting on her swollen belly. What exactly are you offering? A job. A real job. Project coordinator for our Atlanta division. Salary, benefits, company housing. He paused. A chance to actually change things instead of just surviving them. The words hit her like a physical blow. A real job. Not cleaning toilets or serving food to people who looked through her like she was invisible. Work that mattered. Work that could make a difference. What's the catch? Richard's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. You'd have to move to Palm Beach, work out of our main office until the baby comes, then relocate to Atlanta to oversee the projects. Palm Beach. She said it like it was a foreign country, where your fiancé lives, where everyone saw you dancing with the help. Victoria and I. He ran a hand through his hair. That situation is complicated. Complicated how? I haven't spoken to her since the night of the ball. The admission hung between them like a confession. Alana felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. Why? Because I can't stop thinking about you. There was again. The honesty that cut through all her defenses and left her feeling exposed. Vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with pregnancy or poverty. If someone offered to change your entire life, but you weren't sure of their motives, would you take the risk? The question echoed in her mind as she studied his face, looking for the lie. The angle. The reason why a billionaire would upend his perfect life for a woman he barely knew. This is crazy, she said finally. Yes. You don't know anything about me. My background, my education, I know you worked 3 jobs while pregnant to keep a roof over your head. I know you turned humiliation into grace and made a room full of strangers applaud. I know you have more integrity in your little finger than most people have in their entire body. His voice dropped, and I know that 3 minutes of dancing with you taught me more about myself than 35 years of living. The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough to make Alana gasp. Her hand flew to her side, and Richard was beside her in an instant. Are you okay? Just the baby reminding me that this isn't just about me anymore. She looked up at him, this man who'd walked into her world and turned it upside down. If I say yes, what happens when people find out? When the press gets hold of the story? Let me worry about that. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll call a gold digger. Richard's hand covered hers where it rested on her belly. The touch sent heat shooting through her entire body. Anyone who knows you for 5 minutes would never believe that. As contractions gripped her suddenly, she grabbed his hand and whispered, "If I don't make it, promise me." His world stopped completely. She brought life into the world in his arms, and suddenly everything he thought he knew about himself shattered into a million pieces. The contractions started at 3 a.m. in the hospital room, ripping through Alana's body like lightning. Richard had been dozing in the chair beside her bed when her cry of pain jolted him awake. Her face was twisted in agony, one hand clutching her belly, the other reaching for him. "It's too early," she gasped between waves of pain. "The baby's not due for 3 weeks. It's going to be okay." Richard hit the call button while taking her hand. "We're in the best hospital in Atlanta. You're going to be fine." But as the medical team rushed in, preparing for an emergency delivery, Richard felt something shift inside his chest. This wasn't about attraction anymore, or curiosity, or even obsession. This was about the woman he was falling in love with, bringing new life into the world, and the terror that he might lose both of them. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of medical jargon, bright lights, and Alana's hand gripping his with strength that amazed him. She didn't scream, didn't curse. She breathed through each contraction with a determination that reminded him why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. "Push, Alana." One more push. And then, in a rush of fluid and motion that seemed impossible after hours of struggle, the baby slipped into the world. A tiny, perfect boy with his mother's nose and lungs that announced his arrival to everyone within 5 blocks. "He's beautiful," the doctor said, placing the baby on Alana's chest. "Small but strong, just like his mama." Richard stared at the tiny human being, slick with birth and crying with indignation, and felt something crack open inside his heart. He'd never wanted children, had never seen the point in continuing a bloodline that had produced nothing but money and emptiness. But looking at this baby, this perfect little person who'd fought his way into existence 3 weeks early, Richard felt a love so fierce it took his breath away. "Look at him," Alana whispered, tears streaming down her face as she touched the baby's tiny fingers. "Look at his hands." The baby's crying stopped as he heard his mother's voice. His eyes opened, dark and unfocused, searching for the sound that had comforted him for 9 months. When Alana spoke again, he turned toward her like a flower following the sun. "He knows you," Richard said, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't expected. "Of course he knows me. We've been together all this time." She looked up at Richard, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. What should we call him? The question hit him like a punch to the gut. She was including him in this moment, this decision that would shape her son's entire life. A woman who barely knew him was asking for his opinion on the most important choice a mother makes. "What were you thinking?" "Marcus," she said without hesitation. "After my grandfather. He was the strongest man I ever knew. Marcus Williams." Richard tested the name, liking the way it sounded. Strong, solid, nothing like the pretentious names that filled Palm Beach social registers. 3 weeks later, after Alana had recovered and Marcus had proven he was every bit as determined as his mother, Richard made his offer again. This time, he wasn't talking about just a job. "Come to Palm Beach," he said, standing in her hospital room with discharge papers and a car seat he had delivered that morning. "Both of you." "Richard, I know it's complicated. I know it looks bad. I know what people will say." He moved closer to her bed, where she was nursing Marcus with a natural grace that made his chest tight. "But I also know that I can't let you walk out of my life. What moment made you realize you were stronger than you ever imagined? Share your transformation story, because what Richard said next would change everything for all 3 of them. I want to be part of this, part of his life, part of your life. Not as charity, not as guilt, but as—" He stopped, struggling with words that had never mattered before. "As what?" "As the man who's falling in love with both of you." The phone call came at 3 a.m., 3 days later. His board had called an emergency meeting. Someone had leaked photos of him at the hospital, holding Marcus while Alana slept. The headlines were already being written, and his carefully constructed world was about to explode. The headline screamed, "Billionaire's baby mama scandal." But the real story was how love looked in the face of pure hatred. Richard stared at the newspaper spread across his desk, each headline worse than the last. Cole's secret family. From Maid to Millionaire, the help that helped herself. The photos were even worse. Him holding Marcus in the hospital. Alana leaving the medical center with a baby carrier. The two of them in his car outside her apartment building. Someone had been following them for weeks. This is a disaster, Richard. His attorney, James Morrison, paced the office like a caged animal. The board is meeting in an hour. Victoria is threatening to sue for humiliation. The charity that hosted the ball wants to distance themselves from you. Let them. James stopped pacing. You're not hearing me. They have the votes to remove you as CEO. Your own company, Richard. The empire your grandfather built. Richard looked up from the newspapers, his face calm in a way that had always made his enemies nervous. Then they'll have to do what they think is best. This is about more than some fling with the help. This is about your legacy. Watch your mouth. The words came out quiet and deadly. That woman has more class in her little finger than everyone in that boardroom combined. The door burst open without warning. Victoria Ashworth swept in wearing designer armor and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. Her blonde hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her fury barely contained beneath a layer of Southern Belle charm. "Hello, darling." She placed Richard's engagement ring on his desk with a click that echoed like a gunshot. "I thought you might want this back." "Victoria." "No, don't explain. I read the papers. I saw the photos. My mother always said you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but I never imagined you'd try quite so literally." James cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should leave you two alone." "Stay," Victoria commanded. "You're going to want to hear this." She turned back to Richard, her smile widening. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I have a solution that benefits everyone. I'm listening. You marry me as planned. The girl and her bastard disappear. Quietly. Permanently. I'll even write the check myself." She named a figure that would have been life-changing for most people. Everyone wins. You keep your company, I keep my reputation, and she gets enough money to raise her child somewhere far away from here. Richard stood up slowly, his movements controlled in a way that made Victoria take a step back. "Get out. Richard, be reasonable. Get out of my office. Get out of my building. Get out of my life. You're choosing her over everything? Over your family's legacy? Over $1 billion company. I'm choosing love over a life that was slowly killing me." Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "She's using you. Can't you see that? A pregnant maid shows up at your charity ball, puts on a little show, and suddenly you're ready to throw away everything for what? Good sex. Careful." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper that froze the blood in Victoria's veins. "You're talking about the woman I love. Have you ever been in a relationship that others tried to destroy? How did you protect what mattered when the whole world seemed against you?" The board meeting was a massacre. 12 men in expensive suits, most of them friends of his father, sitting around a mahogany table discussing his fate like he wasn't in the room. Richard listened to their concerns, their threats, their ultimatums with the same calm expression he'd worn while Victoria tried to buy Alana's disappearance. "You have 48 hours, the chairman announced. End this relationship, issue a public apology, and marry Victoria Ashworth as planned. Or we'll vote you out and name David Brennan as interim CEO." Richard looked around the table at faces he'd known his entire life. Men who'd bounced him on their knees at Christmas parties, who'd taught him to play golf and hunt quail and navigate the treacherous waters of high society. Men who were now willing to destroy him for falling in love with the wrong woman. "I need 24 hours to consider your terms." When his fiancée showed up at Alana's apartment that evening with a check and a threat, the amount written on it made Alana's blood freeze in her veins. She could take $5 million and disappear, or stay and watch the man she loved lose everything for her. Victoria stood in the doorway of Alana's small apartment like a vision from another world. Her white designer dress glowed in the harsh fluorescent light of the hallway, and diamonds sparkled at her throat like stars. Behind her, A man in a black suit held a briefcase that probably cost more than Alana's rent for 2 years. "May I come in?" Victoria's voice was honey over poison. "We have business to discuss." Alana shifted Marcus to her other arm, the baby fussing against her shoulder. She'd been feeding him when the doorbell rang, and her shirt was still damp with milk stains. The contrast between them couldn't have been more obvious. Victoria looked like she belonged in magazines. Alana looked like she belonged exactly where she was. "I don't think we have anything to discuss. $5 million suggests otherwise." The words hung in the air between them like a landmine waiting to explode. Alana's heart stopped beating for a moment, then started again with painful intensity. $5 million. More money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of cleaning floors and serving food. Enough to guarantee Marcus would never want for anything. "Can I at least come inside?" These hallways echo, and what I have to say is rather private. Against her better judgment, Alana stepped back. Victoria entered like she was inspecting a museum exhibit, her eyes taking in the second-hand furniture and carefully patched walls. The man with the briefcase followed, setting it on Alana's small dining table with ceremonial precision. "Cozy," Victoria said, though her tone suggested anything but approval. "Very authentic. What do you want?" Victoria opened the briefcase, revealing more cash than Alana had ever seen in one place. Neat stacks of hundreds, organized like soldiers in formation. "I want to solve both our problems." "I don't have a problem."
"Don't you?" Victoria's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "Let me paint you a picture, darling. Richard loses his company tomorrow. The board votes him out. He loses his fortune, his reputation, his family legacy. All for what? A fantasy about playing house with the help." Marcus whimpered, sensing his mother's tension. Alana bounced him gently, trying to keep her voice steady. "That's his choice to make. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're letting a good man destroy himself for your benefit." Victoria moved closer, her perfume filling the small space. $5 million. Enough to move anywhere you want, raise your son properly, give him every advantage. All you have to do is disappear. Would you walk away from love to save someone's career? Or stay and fight together when the odds were impossible? And if I say no, then you get to watch Richard lose everything while you're working 2 jobs again, trying to raise a child in poverty. Because make no mistake, sweetie, once his money is gone, once the excitement of slumming it wears off, he'll realize what a mistake he's made. Rich men don't really marry their maids. They just play with them for a while. The words hit like physical blows. Every insecurity Alana had buried came roaring back to life. What if Victoria was right? What if Richard's feelings were just guilt mixed with lust? What if watching him lose his empire would turn love into resentment? "I need time to think." "Of course you do." Victoria snapped the briefcase shut, but left it on the table. "You have until tomorrow morning. Richard's board meets at 10 a.m. After that, the offer expires, and we all live with the consequences." She paused at the door, looking back at Alana with something that might have been pity. "You seem like a sweet girl. Don't let pride cost both of you everything." When the door closed, Alana sank onto her couch, Marcus still fussing in her arms. The briefcase sat on her table like a judgment waiting to be rendered. $5 million. A lifetime of security for her son. All she had to do was walk away from the first man who'd ever looked at her and seen something worth fighting for. Her phone rang. Richard's voice was rough with exhaustion. "I need to see you. Tonight. Before everything changes forever." She took the check, but what she did with it would either destroy them forever or save them both. The $5 million check was signed, but not how anyone expected. Richard arrived at Alana's apartment at midnight, his hair disheveled and his shirt untucked. He looked like a man who'd been wrestling with angels and losing. When she opened the door, holding Marcus against her chest, his face crumpled with relief. "I thought you might be gone." "Not yet." She stepped back to let him in, noting how his eyes went immediately to the briefcase still sitting on her dining table. "We need to talk." Victoria came here. It wasn't a question. He could read the answer in her face, in the tension in her shoulders, in the way she held Marcus like a shield against the world. She made an offer. I know. 5 million to disappear. Richard ran both hands through his hair. The board gave me their ultimatum this afternoon. Marry Victoria, publicly apologize for my indiscretion, and promise to never see you again, or lose everything. Alana moved to the window, looking out at the Atlanta streets where she'd grown up fighting for every scrap of dignity. Maybe they're right. What? Look at us, Richard. Really look. She turned to face him, Marcus sleeping peacefully in her arms. You're about to lose a billion-dollar empire. For what? A woman you barely know and a baby that isn't even yours. That baby is mine. The words came out fierce and certain. Not because of biology, but because I choose him. I choose both of you, even if it costs you everything, especially then. Have you ever turned someone's weapon against them? Share your comeback story, because what happened next shocked everyone in that boardroom. Richard moved closer, his hands gentle as he traced the curve of Marcus's sleeping face. I've been thinking about what my grandfather would say. He built coal enterprises from nothing, working 18-hour days in construction sites across Florida. You know what he told me before he died? What? That money without purpose is just paper. That a man's real worth isn't what he owns, but what he's willing to sacrifice for what matters. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. You and Marcus matter more than any company. Alana felt tears burning behind her eyes. The board will destroy you. Let them try. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a legal document. I've been busy today. Want to know what I found when I started digging into our board members' business dealings? She read the papers with growing amazement. Offshore accounts, tax evasion, embezzlement from the very charities they claim to support. Years of corruption hidden behind expensive suits and country club handshakes. How did you? Turns out having the best private investigators' money has its advantages. Richard's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Victoria's family trust alone has enough irregularities to keep federal prosecutors busy for years. So what happens now? Now we go to that board meeting together. All three of us. He gently took Marcus from her arms, the baby stirring but not waking. Time for some people to learn what real power looks like. The check for Victoria's briefcase lay on the table between them, but Alana had already endorsed it. Not to herself, but to the Atlanta Children's Hospital. Every penny of Victoria's bribe money would go to helping families like hers get the medical care they needed. You sign it over to charity. Seemed appropriate. Your grandfather's money helping kids who need it most. Richard stared at her with an expression that took her breath away. Love mixed with admiration and something deeper. Recognition of a partner who could match his strength with her own. The vote was tied at the emergency board meeting until the door opened and an unexpected ally walked in. Someone from Alana's past who would change everything once again. The maid who once scrubbed floors now sat at the head of a billion-dollar boardroom table, and she wasn't finished yet. The Coal Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Alana entered, carrying Marcus in one arm and a leather portfolio in the other. 12 of Florida's most powerful men stared at her like she'd dropped from another planet. Richard stood at the far end of the mahogany table, his evidence spread across the polished surface like weapons waiting to be used. But it was the man who walked in behind Alana that made half the board members go pale. Gentlemen, said District Attorney Marcus Williams Sr., Alana's uncle, I believe you all know me. Richard's mouth fell open. The board members looked like they'd swallow glass. Victoria, who had somehow secured a seat for the meeting, gripped her purse so hard her knuckles went white. Uncle Marcus, Alana said calmly, settling into the chair at the head of the table like she belonged there. Thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it, sweetheart. Especially after you called and told me about these gentlemen's business practices. The chairman, David Brennan, found his voice first. This is highly irregular. This is a private board meeting. About criminal activity, D.A. Williams interrupted, placing his own briefcase on the table, which makes it very much my business. Shall we start with the Cayman Islands accounts? Or would you prefer to discuss the charity fund embezzlement first? When did you realize you were more powerful than people gave you credit for? The question hung in the air as Alana opened her portfolio, revealing documents that made the board members shift uncomfortably in their expensive chairs. 3 years ago, Alana began, her voice steady and clear. I started working for a temp agency that cleaned offices at night, including the offices of several board members here. Amazing what people throw in the trash when they think the help can't read. She pulled out photocopies of documents, emails, financial records. Years of evidence collected by a woman they'd never bothered to notice. Bank statements showing payments to shell companies. Emails discussing how to hide assets from tax authorities. Meeting notes about inflating charity expenses while pocketing donations. Her eyes swept the room. Did you really think no one was paying attention? Richard stared at the woman he loved with newfound admiration. She hadn't just survived in their world, she'd been gathering intelligence the entire time. This is blackmail, Victoria hissed. No, D.A. Williams said mildly, this is evidence, which my office has been building cases around for the past 6 months. The room erupted in chaos. Accusations flew across the table. Lawyers were threatened to be called. But through it all, Alana sat calm and composed, baby Marcus sleeping peacefully against her chest. Here's what's going to happen, she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. Richard keeps his position as CEO. The board votes to approve our new community development initiative, fully funded. And everyone in this room who wants to avoid federal prison starts making very different choices. You can't threaten us, Brennan blustered. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm offering you the same choice you gave Richard. Accept the new terms or face the consequences of your actions. The vote, when it finally came, was unanimous. Richard remained as CEO. The Atlanta project received full funding. And Alana Williams became the new director of community development for Cole Enterprises. As they left the building together, Richard couldn't stop staring at her. How long have you been planning this? Since the night you showed up at my apartment in the rain. I knew if we were going to make this work, I needed insurance. She smiled up at him. Did you really think I'd let them destroy you without a fight? Success tasted sweet until the FBI knocked on their door 3 days later with questions about missing charity funds that had nothing to do with the board's crimes. They survived the boardroom battle, but federal prosecutors don't care about love stories. The FBI agent stood in Richard's penthouse living room like gray-suited harbingers of doom. Agent Sarah Chun, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for billionaire charm, spread photographs across his coffee table. Bank records, wire transfers, charity donation receipts that didn't match the amounts actually received. Mr. Cole, Agent Chun said, her voice as cold as winter rain. We have evidence that over the past 5 years, approximately $12 million in charity donations have been diverted from their intended recipients. Richard stared at the photos, his blood turning to ice water. These weren't the board members' crimes. This was something else entirely. Something that had his signature on every document. I don't understand. These donations went exactly where they were supposed to go. That's not what our investigation shows. Agent Shin pulled out another folder. The Sunshine Children's Hospital received less than half of what donors believe they were giving. The same with the Miami Homeless Initiative and the Jacksonville Food Bank. Alana sat on the couch beside him, Marcus sleeping in her arms, watching the federal agents destroy their life with clinical precision. Where did the rest of the money go? That's what we're here to find out. Agent Chin's eyes never left Richard's face. Someone with access to these accounts has been systematically stealing from charities for years. Someone with the authority to approve transfers and hide the paper trail. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Richard Cole, billionaire CEO, stealing from sick children and hungry families. The media would have a field day. His enemies would dance in the streets. Everything he'd fought to build with Alana would crumble into dust. I didn't steal that money. Richard's voice was steady, but Alana could see the fear in his eyes. Fear not for himself, but for what this would do to her and Marcus. Then who did? Richard's mind raced through possibilities. Who had access to the charity accounts? Who could authorize transfers without his direct oversight? The answer, when it came, hit him like a physical blow. My assistant, Patricia Manning. She's handled the charity coordination for 8 years. Agent Chin made a note. We'll need to speak with Ms. Manning. Unfortunately, she seems to have disappeared. Left the country 3 days ago, according to passport records. 3 days ago, right after the board meeting. Right after Patricia would have realized her crimes were about to be exposed along with everyone else's. This is a setup, Alana said quietly. Someone's using Richard as a scapegoat. That's what they all say, ma'am. Agent Chin's smile was sharp as broken glass. Mr. Cole, you're not under arrest at this time, but I strongly advise you not to leave the state while this investigation is ongoing. After the agents left, Richard and Alana sat in the ruins of their newfound happiness. Marcus fussed in his mother's arms, picking up on the tension that filled the apartment like smoke. They're going to destroy you, Alana whispered. Even if you prove your innocence, the damage will be done. No one will trust you. No one will do business with you. Would you stand by someone when the whole world turned against them? What's your loyalty limit when everything you've built together faces destruction? We'll get through this, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. We'll find Patricia, prove she was embezzling, clear my name. And if we can't, Richard pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. Then we disappear. Take Marcus somewhere they can never find us. Start over with nothing but each other. You'd give up everything? Your company, your family name, your entire life. I already gave up everything that mattered when I fell in love with you. Everything else is just noise. The prosecutor's call came that evening. Alana was offered full immunity if she testified against Richard, claiming he'd forced her to help launder the charity money through her community connections. Her response shocked everyone, including the man she loved. She faced the prosecutor with the same dignity she'd shown on that dance floor, and her words would either save or damn them both. Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres had the kind of smile that made honest people nervous and guilty people confess. He sat across from Alana in the sterile conference room like a spider waiting for flies, his offer of immunity spread across the table like bait. Ms. Williams, you're in a unique position to help us put away a very dangerous criminal. His voice oozed false sympathy. Richard Cole has been stealing from charities for years. Money that should have gone to sick children, homeless families, people just like you. Alana shifted Marcus to her other arm, the baby's weight grounding her in reality. Through the window, she could see Richard pacing in the hallway, his lawyer beside him gesturing frantically. They'd agreed she should hear the prosecutor's offer alone, but now she wondered if that had been a mistake. You're offering me immunity in exchange for what, exactly? Testimony that Cole forced you to help him hide the stolen money, that he used your community connections to launder charity funds through fake recipients. Torres leaned forward, his eyes glinting. We know he's been supporting you financially, paying for your apartment, your medical bills, your son's needs. That money had to come from somewhere. It came from his personal accounts. Did it? Or did it come for donations meant for hungry children? The accusation hit like a slap. Alana felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from shame, but from anger. This man was trying to turn Richard's generosity into evidence of crime, trying to make her love look like conspiracy. You want me to lie? I want you to tell the truth about how Cole manipulated you, how he used your situation, your pregnancy, your desperation to make you complicit in his crimes. Torres's voice softened, taking on the tone adults used with confused children. You're not the villain here, Ms. Williams. You're the victim, a poor, pregnant woman taken advantage of by a rich, powerful man. Would you risk everything to tell the truth about someone you love, even when the lie would save you both? Alana looked down at Marcus, sleeping peacefully in her arms. This man was offering her son security, safety, a future free from the shadow of scandal. All she had to do was throw Richard under the bus. Sacrifice the man who'd seen her worth when no one else would. I know this man's heart, she said finally, her voice carrying the same quiet strength that had stopped a ballroom full of people 3 months ago. Richard Cole didn't steal that money. He didn't force me to do anything. And if you think I'm going to destroy an innocent man to save myself, you don't know me at all. Torres's friendly mask slipped. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Williams. When this goes to trial, we'll paint you as his accomplice. You'll go to prison. Your son will grow up in foster care. Then I guess you'd better make sure your case is bulletproof." She stood up, Marcus stirring against her chest. "Because I'm about to tell you exactly what happened to that charity money, and it's going to blow your prosecution apart." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Richard's fate hung on 12 strangers' understanding of justice and the testimony of a woman who'd chosen truth over safety. The verdict was not guilty, but their real victory was what happened next. The courtroom held its breath as the jury foreman stood up, a piece of paper trembling in his weathered hands. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his lawyer beside him, while Alana watched from the gallery with Marcus sleeping in her arms. 3 months of hell had led to this moment. On the charge of embezzlement of charitable funds, we find the defendant not guilty. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. Relief so intense it made his knees weak flooded through his body. Behind him, he heard Alana's soft sob of joy, and he turned to see tears streaming down her beautiful face. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud charitable organizations, we find the defendant not guilty. The prosecutor's table looked like they'd swallowed poison. Torres shuffled his papers with hands that shook slightly, his career-making case crumbling into dust. The jury had believed Alana's testimony about Patricia Manning's embezzlement scheme. They believed the evidence Richard's investigators had uncovered showing the missing money in offshore accounts controlled by his former assistant. Most importantly, they believed in the love between a billionaire and a woman who'd risked everything to stand by him. "Mr. Cole," the judge said after the jury was dismissed, "you're free to go." Case dismissed. The media circus outside the courthouse was exactly what Richard had expected. Cameras flashed like lightning as he emerged with Alana beside him, Marcus bundled against her chest. Reporters shouted questions over each other, their voices creating a wall of noise and chaos. "Mr. Cole, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you be suing the prosecutor's office? What's next for you and Ms. Williams?" Richard stopped on the courthouse steps, his arm around Alana's waist, and faced the cameras with the same confidence he'd once used in boardrooms. 3 months ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about money and power and impressing people who didn't matter. His voice carried clearly over the chaos. I was wrong. Success is standing beside someone who believes in your innocence when the whole world thinks you're guilty. Success is loving someone so much that losing everything else doesn't scare you. What victory in your life felt most earned? Share your triumph story, because what Richard said next would change how the world saw their love. Alana Williams didn't just save my reputation. She saved my soul. She showed me what real strength looks like, what real grace means, what real love can do when it's built on truth instead of convenience. He turned to look at her, this woman who'd walked into his world and changed everything. Which is why I'm not asking her to marry me here in front of all these cameras. That moment belongs to us, not to you. The crowd laughed, some of them wiping their eyes. Even the hardest reporters seemed moved by the raw honesty in his voice. But I will say this. 3 months ago, a pregnant woman accepted my cruel challenge to prove her worth on a dance floor. Today, I'm the one grateful to be worthy of dancing with her for the rest of my life. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, the setting sun painting Palm Beach in shades of gold, Alana felt the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders. They'd survived scandal, corruption, federal prosecution, and the judgment of a world that wanted to see them fail. As they watched Marcus take his first wobbly steps on the beach that evening, Richard dropped to one knee, but his proposal wasn't what anyone expected. 3 years after she scrubbed floors at his charity ball, she returned to that same ballroom, this time as his equal partner in every way that mattered. The Cole Resort ballroom sparkled with the same crystal chandeliers, the same polished marble floors, the same view of the Atlantic Ocean stretching toward forever. But everything else had changed. Where once Florida's elite had sipped champagne and written checks for tax deductions, tonight the room was filled with families from Atlanta, Jacksonville, and Miami. Construction workers in their Sunday best. Single mothers who'd saved for months to buy new dresses. Children who'd never seen luxury like this running between tables with wide-eyed wonder. Alana stood at the edge of the dance floor in her wedding dress. Simple white silk that flowed around her like water, chosen not for its designer label, but for how it made her feel. Beautiful, worthy, complete. 3 years ago, I asked you to dance, Richard said, appearing beside her in a tuxedo that somehow looked less intimidating than it had that terrible night. Tonight, I'm asking you to dance with me for the rest of our lives. The orchestra began the same waltz that had started everything, the same melody that had turned humiliation into something beautiful, mockery into love, two separate worlds into one shared future. Are you sure you're ready for that? Alana smiled up at him, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. Dancing with me for 50 years might get boring. Never. Richard pulled her onto the floor where they'd first touched, first felt the spark that would reshape both their lives. I plan to fall in love with you over and over again, every single day. They moved together like they'd been dancing forever, her white dress swirling around them while their friends and family watched with tears in their eyes. Marcus, now a sturdy 3-year-old, clapped from his seat at the head table, his gap-toothed grin lighting up the room. You taught me that nobility isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts, Richard whispered against her ear as they spun through a turn that had once seemed impossible. It's about how you treat people when you have all the power. The community center they'd built together stood across town, serving families just like Alana's had been. The Alana Williams Center for Economic Opportunity, her name in brass letters because Richard had insisted she was the real force behind their success. 300 families had found jobs through their programs. 500 children had received scholarships. 1,000 dreams had been given the chance to grow. Do you ever regret it? She asked as the music swelled around them. Giving up the simple life for all this chaos. Simple, Richard laughed, spinning her out and pulling her back against his chest. Loving you has been many things, but simple isn't one of them. Extraordinary, yes. Life-changing, absolutely. Worth every moment of chaos, without question. If someone challenged your worth today, would you dance? Would you prove them wrong? Tell me what makes you worthy of love and respect. As the waltz ended, the room erupted in applause, but neither of them heard it. They were lost in each other's eyes, remembering the journey that had brought them here. From employer and employee to partners in every sense. From two people from different worlds to one family building something beautiful together. I love you, Mrs. Cole, Richard whispered against her lips. I love you too, she whispered back. Now and always. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of love conquering impossible odds. Comment below. Would you have taken that dance? Would you have stayed when the world turned against you? And remember, sometimes the person who challenges you most becomes the one who changes you most. Your story matters too. Share in the comments.